Hello, I'm Ken Wysocki, a reporter for Automotive News, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar entitled The Slow Death of Channel Marketing, the Birth of VIN-Aware. This Automotive News Retail Spotlight Series webinar is brought to you by LotLinks, and we're delighted you're with us today for this presentation. Before I introduce our speaker today, just a few navigation tips. First of all, we encourage you to ask questions at any time. Just type them into the Q&A box on the left side of the webinar window, and then hit Submit. And I'll steer your questions to our speaker towards the end of this session. Also, if you want to enlarge the slides, just grab the frame with your mouse and pull it, and it'll get bigger. And to download the slides, click on the folder icon at the bottom of your console. Today's speaker is Lance Schaefer. Lance serves as the General Manager of Product and Technology for LotLinks. He helps lead and direct the product and technology team in the creation of products for the automotive digital marketing industry. Combining his digital marketing and software development expertise, Lance helped introduce machine learning to LotLinks' massive ad network and co-developed a technology patent. And now I'll turn it over to Lance and we'll get started. Take it away, Lance.
Great, thank you, Ken. And nice to be here, everyone. Over the last, I've been lucky enough to, over the last 10 years, work with, thousands of dealers. And part of my job is to look for emerging patterns or things, try to anticipate changes or opportunities or problems in the market. And so one thing that I've noticed, and we start to notice more, is kind of what we're calling it, the death of channel marketing, a little bit of a dramatic phrase, but really the birth of VIN-Aware type of the dealers becoming more VIN-Aware in their marketing programs. And we think that that's a huge pattern. I'm going to go into detail what exactly that means, what we're seeing, and how things are impacting that. So before we get into what's going on now, I thought it makes sense to have a little bit of context. This context kind of gives more meaning to why this is happening. And so I thought it'd be worth looking at kind of the last 30 years and the forces that have been in play to get us to this point with dealer marketing. So of course, every era has its own kind of new thing. Traditional media, newspaper, radio, TV, et cetera, of course, was pre-1990s. That's where the audiences were. That allowed dealers to reach their market, but it was a little bit limited to their own markets and a little bit limited in their abilities. And then came the internet, and in the mid 90s, and the lead model was the initial kind of out of the gate internet marketing systems that we saw. So, Auto-By-Tel and Cars Direct, some of the pioneers in that space, really brought the concept of lead generation and leads coming online. And dealers who adapted to that, early on, were huge beneficiaries of capturing the market, moving, from traditional to online. As time went on, we saw the online listings and the portals start to form and become, maybe move from offline to online. Cars.com and AutoTrader obviously leading on there. They're able to, create a huge presence online for automotive shoppers, which allowed, dealers to find, buyers more efficiently. But they weren't cheap. They were expensive and very, very competitive in that, you were on there and still are on there with all of the other inventory out there. Then in the mid-2000s, dealers got access to some of the first statistical and analytical tools, specifically in pricing. Vauto was the pioneer there. Again, early adopters to those saw a great benefit and increased volume in turn. Eventually, though, as everyone started to use these platforms and using similar analytical platforms, we've seen over the last 10 years margins being eroded. And then, of course, in 2010s, really the emergence of massive online platforms like Google and Facebook. And that allowed dealers to kind of to regain some of the control and branding. They could send traffic directly to their websites, but it became overwhelming and highly saturated. In that these are massive platforms, difficult to contain, and created their own problems in that extent. And this really is a really interesting perspective from the data side. Just looking at 10 years. And so in 2010, there were 5 billion ad impressions available in the market. And in 2020, there was 50 billion. So we've seen, the amount of ad impressions as people and consumers change the way that the amount of time that they spend online, mobile, just, the platforms moving to ad sponsored. We've seen this massive increase in the availability of advertising to an audience. The thing that really stands out on this slide, especially, you can see it's growing at an exponential rate. Like last year, 2019 was 34.8 billion, and 2020 came in at 50 billion. Part of that probably was COVID and people being at home more, but we're seeing that growth anyways, and we saw that accentuated. At the same time, we're seeing signals of about 70 million people showing some type of shopper activity, but only about 4 million actual vehicle transactions and actual buyers happening every month. So even though, the big insight here is, even though the amount of vehicle transactions have been pretty static over the last 10 years, generally up and down a bit, we're seeing so much more availability, so many more places that we can actually advertise inventory and on behalf of a dealer, and that's becoming a big problem. There's so many places, and here's just a small list. The question I get a lot of times: where should I advertise? Where should I go? Who's the best? And the reality is they're all great. It really depends on the scenario, but really this will just continue. You think of some things like I get asked sometimes, should I be on TikTok? I mean, that's an emerging platform, and how does a dealer fit into there? So it really is becoming quite overwhelming, and new solutions and new strategies have to be put in play, just like we have in the past, in order to deal with this increasingly complex and overwhelming kind of changing. So what's happening because of all this change and all these, all this growth in the ad ecosystem, we're seeing some dysfunctions inside of dealer marketing that are being created by it. And these are the major ones that we've noticed. One is arbitrary. So the first there. So, when we ask dealers, how are you spending money, or what's your strategy for digital advertising? Generally speaking, the answers we get back is, well, we're spending $3,000-4,000 on SEM, $5,000 on Facebook, X amount on the portals, etc. Right? And so, but it's fairly arbitrary. So in other words, if we say, well, why that much? Why not this much? It's somewhat arbitrary. There are some, of course, it's not completely arbitrary, but it's somewhat arbitrary considering, the different spend amounts. The second dysfunction is that the channels are silo. So even though all of the dealers are trying to sell the same inventory, all the channels are running a different program. So Google's not talking to Facebook saying, hey, we got you covered on this VIN, or we got you covered over here, or that. They're all running their own kind of nerve center. So that's creating a dysfunction in terms of inefficiency and waste. Many channels are covering the same things. Unnatural pacing. So, generally speaking, most of the ad budgets are deployed on a monthly basis, but really, or calendar. But that actually does reduce performance, because ultimately, every vehicle has its own life cycle and could benefit from its own marketing program, not necessarily a calendar-based program. The channel is deciding. So this is a really big one. The dealer really, when they send their inventory into the different channels, say it's Google, an auto listing site, or Facebook, they can send all their inventory, of course, which is great. but they don't really know which vehicles. There's no way to really control which vehicles are getting the marketing budget. So what's happening is that often the vehicles that are getting the promotion from those channels are the ones that actually don't need as much promotion because they're a little bit hot. You think about how different platforms optimize. They're looking for those hotter cars, and those are the ones actually maybe your organic traffic already have. No need to additionally market those vehicles, or not as much as they're getting marketed. So the channels are making the decision for the dealer really on which vehicles to promote. And the dealer is blind at the VIN level. So generally, the reporting that dealers get from their ad channels are more like what I call digital metrics. So they're getting the amount of leads, maybe time on site, new visitors, and not to say those aren't important, but they're not specific to the inventory. So they don't actually have an inventory. I mean, in every other part of the business, dealers get reporting based on the inventory and then what's going on in the inventory, and so it's really disjointed. And again, another dysfunction that we're seeing inside of the marketing budget. And another feedback that we see is that there is this kind of forced spend, so we have to do this much at Google, we have to do this much Facebook, we got to do this much. So, and if we don't spend it, we're at risk of losing these budgets. So we hear this from our internet directors. So keeping the ball rolling, it means keeping the advertising rolling. So again, it's not a very proactive approach, relatively speaking. So of course, our kind of thought is that dealers need to become VIN aware, and we think this is the next largest trend. We're already seeing it happening when it comes to dealership marketing in order to solve these pain points. So ultimately, we know that the goal of marketing is to increase turn, improve margins, and gain market share. So in other words, when we look at marketing, we say what's its job, and its job is to do these three things. Of course, if you nail all those three things, you become number one in your market. But those are really the job of marketing. So all systems that control marketing should have these outcomes as their primary reason for that. So what does VIN-Aware mean? Well, in our view, VIN-Aware is the future of how dealers are going to manage their marketing. What that means is marketing plan for every VIN. Now that seems like a lot of work, and that's where automation and AI and all those things come in, but every VIN really should have its own plan. Some VINs need less marketing, some needs more, etc. So for example, allocating a dynamic budget per VIN. With enough data, we know for a fact that some VINs need more marketing than others. So that becomes VIN aware. If you know that, you become VIN aware. You say, well, just like some vehicles need more reconditioning than others when they come in. This at some point will be as evident. That some need more than others. The budgets will be focused more on outcomes, the most profitable results, not necessarily on kind of more arbitrary channel placements. The channels become the secondary driver of marketing. So right now, again, if you ask most dealers, what is your marketing plan? They typically start with the channels. They say, oh, I'm doing Google, I'm doing Facebook, I'm doing a couple car listing sites, maybe I'm doing Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace. So they're talking in channels, and that's because they don't have the VIN awareness capability yet. But generally speaking, the channels should be secondary to the vehicle. So in other words, the vehicles are deciding which certain vehicles will do better in certain channels than other vehicles, and we know that for a fact. Yet the channels are actually deciding which vehicles get the marketing. And in that, kind of in that realm, the VINs and the vehicles will dictate the channels unbiasedly. So in other words, when a vehicle needs to be marketed, or a set of vehicles, or all the inventory, the channels that get distributed, that inventory gets distributed to, is unbiased. So in other words, if Facebook performs better for this VIN than Google, then Facebook gets the budget, and vice versa. Or maybe it's a mix, maybe some Facebook, some Google, and some auto listing, and etc. And of course, that's all in the context of some of the earned organic that a dealer's already worked so hard to get through SEO and through their branding efforts. And the last thing really that we think, in the circle of being VIN aware in the marketing is letting the predicted days on lot have the impact on how quickly you pace a VIN campaign. So in other words, if we know that, the average vehicle of this year, make, model in the market will be on lot for 45 days, that should be the duration of the campaign. You don't want to blow your brains out and promote, put all your marketing dollars into that VIN in the first 5 days, and you don't want to overstretch it, so you're just waiting and waiting to have the marketing. So there's a sweet spot really that every VIN has in terms of marketing pace as well. So I thought I'd break it down and just show people kind of real in kind of imagery how that looks in more practical terms. So if we start at the top, in terms of the budget, typically what we see is a dealer spending about $32,000 on marketing, at least for our customers. But 25,000 is allocated to selling inventory, and then there's a couple thousand allocated to service and about 5,000 to brand efforts. This is typically what we see in the digital space. Of that 25,000, that's what I'll focus on. That's what goes into these channels. So this is kind of the current state of the market. So these, 25,000, 3,000 is going into some miscellaneous channel work, that a dealer usually is trying out. Maybe 6K in SEM, 1,000 into display, maybe 3,000 into social, and 3,000 into video, and 9,000 into the portals. So, generally speaking, this is currently what's going on. So this is how a dealer is allocating. This is just an example, but this is an example of how a dealer would be allocating this budget. But the problem is again, these channels are all siloed and separate, and they're not VIN aware. So they're not they don't have kind of the baked in knowledge about the vehicle inventory to make the best choices. I mean, the platforms are all great, but they don't know exactly which vehicles to send the traffic to. So it becomes arbitrary. So, different vehicles are getting a different amount of traffic based on what the channels are deciding. So and that creates that dysfunction again. And again, those different channels aren't even talking to each other. So they could all be sending traffic to the same, 20% of the vehicles. And again, those might be the 20% that already have enough organic coverage, which creates waste. And that budget could be reallocated to the vehicles that actually will see a movement in terms of turn and margin by moving that budget over to those vehicles. And we have lots of examples of those. These are something I see all the time, every day. Here's a good example of Facebook. Facebook has a wonderful product in that you can actually send all their vehicles up to Facebook. But because Facebook isn't aware of the strategy that you have on the lot, it's sending a whole lot more traffic to some VINs other than other. And here's an example. This is a real example of one of our customers. That is spending. I think this customer has about 300 cars on the lot, and they're spending 85 or 90% of their budget on these 17 or 18 vehicles. And so, when we asked the dealer, hey, are you aware that this is happening? They don't know. They think because they're sending all the vehicles up to Facebook that they're all getting covered, and that's not the case, because if you think about using as a user of Facebook, they optimize usually to the hottest content, and the hottest content is usually the vehicles that are the easiest to sell or that have a market for and don't need a whole lot of help. So we're basically promoting vehicles often that really don't need it. And it's not Facebook's fault. Facebook hasn't been sent an instruction to not promote those vehicles or to promote other ones more. If they had that instruction, they would do that. So it's just the way that the channels operate. So that's and here's another example. It's the same story in AdWords. Again, sending all the inventory up to AdWords, but finding out that only really 10% of the vehicles are getting the traffic, and again, they're the ones that don't really need that much traffic. So this is what we think VINAware looks like, and this is what we think the future state of how dealers are going to move. And I think they have to, and the ones that do are going to have a much more efficient marketing and really have excellent results in terms of really having their marketing move vehicles faster than they'd expect in market and at more margin. So in this system, if you remember the other, the current state, the inventory set up in the channels get the budget. But in this state, the actual inventory gets the budget. So for example, I've got these 3 cars here. You can see those 3 cars. One has a $192 budget, one has a $68 budget, and one has a $0 budget. And now, why would a car have a $0 budget? Well, it just turns out that it's a hot car in market. The dealer's organic traffic and brand traffic, it really is just getting enough that any amount of advertising wouldn't help it turn faster or get more margin. So there'd be no real reason to advertise that. And in the channel-based marketing system that we think, in its not death throes. I think the title is it's going to be a long process. But it might be sending most of or a huge amount of traffic to the site, so that creates the waste. Now these other cars you can see, have a $192 and $68 budget. That's based on an optimal amount that in this case an AI system has decided. These vehicles will need in order to maximize the relation between margin and inventory turn rate. So, and then you can see, and this is why I say channels will come secondary. Now that the budget is assigned to the VIN, the question is, well, where should that VIN be advertised? And it turns out it depends on the VIN. So if you have a $192 budget for this VIN, we're suggesting, this, channel mix based on a whole bunch of learnings we've seen of similar vehicles that have been on lot and traffic and the audience that's in market right now for that certain vehicle. So it's dynamic to the VIN, not to just so we're deciding at the VIN level where should this go. And in the $68 example, needs a couple less channels than it would need if not. So, and then ultimately everything is, then you become VIN-Aware. And down the road, if you think about it, once these systems are in play, really it becomes very easy to start budgeting, creating an inventory budget. Instead of it being arbitrary, you take a look at every single VIN and groups of VINs, like say new F-150s and new Escapes or new Silverados, whatever it is, and you actually, instead of arbitrarily saying, well, I'm going to spend $25,000 per month on my inventory, systems will say, well, based on the inventory you have, you should be spending, $22,468 with the inventory you have. Now, as new inventory pops in, middle of the month, it gets its own plan and it gets added, and that stuff sells and it gets removed from the budget. So it becomes a fluid system where the inventory is the driver of marketing. And so that really is what we call VIN-Aware, like where we're, and I don't think it's a huge step for dealers to be able to understand. In fact, I think if these systems were available, they would, more available, they would get it, because I think dealers look at everything in a VIN specific way, except their marketing. So, for example, reconditioning. In a way, a dealer would, if a dealer had salespeople on the lot and they only sold 20% of the inventory, they would be aware of that. It would be like, oh, this, and so, this is really the big movement that we think is going to happen. And it's going to create a ton of efficiency and much more better results for those who adapt to it. And this is my final slide. So, AI can help. Obviously lot links, this is the problem we're working on. This is what we're bringing to market over, as much as we can. We have an excellent product that looks at the dealer's lot, is starting to look at, the margin that the dealer's getting on every vehicle, looking at, Google Analytics and ensuring that, we can look at every VIN and create a plan for it. Really the reason it's taken so long for a product like this to come to market is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the ability to collect massive data sets is only relatively new, because it takes a lot of that in order to run a VIN-Aware campaign. If you can imagine every single vehicle having a different campaign running, and not only that, but every single vehicle running in hundreds of channels, these tiny little campaigns in order to optimize. So it takes a lot of technology to get this straight. But we think the time is now that this is coming to market, and that dealers continue to adapt to that. So, anyways, at that rate, that's all my slides. So yeah, so if there's questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Hey, Lance, thank you very much for all the great information. And like you said, we'll turn it over to the audience for their questions. I see one came in here. How would you advise someone to phase out their channel marketing?
Yeah, so ultimately, the best way would be to find a vendor that of course, I would say use LotLinks, but find any vendor that is thinking VIN-Aware uh, and really ask them what they're thinking. Are they considering the inventory before marketing? And so I think really talking to Google and Facebook, they're massive platforms. They don't have the deep inventory knowledge and kind of industry knowledge that you need to do this. So it really has to happen with a kind of a middle tier vendor that interfaces into the publishing ecosystem. My shameless plug is LotLinks can do that, but if you can find another vendor that can do that, that's the way to do it.
But you can't just hit a button and have it all flip over, correct?
That's right. Yeah. No. It takes basically a vendor to go through and create that strategy, and then execute on it. But once it's in play, it is a shift. And at LotLinks we try to make it as simple as, it might not be just hitting one button, but we do try to make it as simple as possible by leveraging AI and software, so that really a dealer is mostly getting feedback of how much they spend on every VIN, what is the plan for every VIN, so that they have some sort of knowledge that it's working. But yeah, like it's a process.
Okay. Here's another one. What factors does AI look at to predict business outcomes?
Yeah, so a good AI system will look at the entire ecosystem, and they're usually comprised of three major areas. So the first would be the market data. So in the case of what we do at LotLinks, we scan about 20,000 dealer websites daily to get a sense of what's happening in the market, what's being offered. That ends up being usually between 4 and 5 million vehicles. And as we take a look at that, we can see vehicles being bought and sold, coming off the website, bought and sold, and getting a good sense of what the days on lot of those vehicles are, and getting a good sense of the market. The second factor is really what's going on in the publisher ecosystem. So, those are kind of more the lead indicators of shopping behavior, and how is that shopping behavior, if for those vehicles happening and working, with the market. So that's kind of the supply and demand, as we call it. So of the industry. And the last is, and probably the one that's probably most overlooked and maybe hardest to do, is connecting those two things to the actual outcomes of the vehicles. So there's a saying, success leaves clues, and AI is really good at finding that at scale and with millions and billions of data points. So if the dealer, if certain things, we're looking for success. So vehicles that moved off lot faster than expected and are consistently adding. What is this? What's going on there? And then getting dealer transaction data to find out. Okay, well, how are the margins looking on these as well? So if you take, we call that outcome, so the outcome of the sale. So if you can tie the outcome to the sale, to the marketing, and then to the entire market, and bring those together, you got yourself a pretty good self-learning AI system that will consistently outperform.
Interesting. All right. I think that brings us to the end of our webinar. I'd like to thank today's audience for all the questions. If you did ask a question that we didn't have time to answer, LotLinks will follow up by email. And if you could do us a favor, if you learned something from this session, please tell your peers about it. The recording of the webinar will be available in about an hour, and you can find that at autonews.com/powertraining. autonews.com/powertraining. When the webinar ends, a survey will pop up on your screen, and your feedback helps us create future webinars that are even more beneficial to you. so we'd appreciate any feedback you can offer. Thanks again to Lance and LotLinks for bringing us to this presentation, and to you for joining us. And on behalf of everyone here at Automotive News, have yourself a great day.